This is Office Hours at Duke University. Today's conversation is with Dan Ariely. Professor Ariely is the James B. Duke Professor of Behavioral Economics here at Duke. He is author of the book Predictably Irrational and is a founding member of the Center for Advanced Hindsight. This year he will be teaching Intro to Behavioral Economics at Duke's Fuqua School of Business. His most recent publication is titled Large Stakes and Big Mistakes. You can join this Duke Office Hours conversation in three ways: by emailing live@duke.edu, visiting the Duke University Facebook page, or using the Twitter tag Duke Live. Professor Ariely, we're at your office hours. You've got this paper out in the Review of Economic Studies, Large Stakes and Big Mistakes. It's particularly timely today with news out about bank bonuses. So let's start with this study. What's it all about?
So, so this news about the bonuses came out today. In some sense, it's not really news, but the news is that this year again, banks have paid tremendous bonuses to their executives. And it's amazing it doesn't fill more of the headlines, and I think it's because we're all kind of upset and disappointed with bankers anyway, and our trust in them is so low that even news like this, that billions of dollars of banks that got TARP money are spending it on bonuses, is not as upsetting as it should be. Just our expectations have been really adjusted, and I think this has to do a lot with the slow long-term recovery of the economy and how our trust in the banking system will take actually much longer to re-emerge. But the thing we became interested in was the question of how effective are these bonuses? So think about it. We're paying all these amounts of money to these people, and you could say, let's just give them high salary and figure out whether that's worth it. But bonuses are a very interesting part of salary. It says, you perform well and I'll pay you. And it sounds much more reasonable, right? I'm not promising you anything up front. You will perform well and I'll give you a bonus based on your performance. And if you think about it, the idea is that if there's a lot of money involved, big bonuses, we want to perform better. No mystery in there, right? Lots of money, you want to perform better. And then there's a link between the wanting to perform better and actually being able to perform better. And that's actually a link that we don't know much about it. And you can think intuitively. Imagine I locked you in a room, and I closed the door, and I said you have 5 hours to do the best productive work you can. And in one condition, I paid you $5,000, a lot of money. In another case, I would say, here is money that is contingent on your ability to perform well. It's a bonus. Now the question is, how would you behave differently in this closed room? What would you do differently? How would you be more productive? Will you actually be more effective in this? And the reality is we don't know much about this link. So to try and understand it, we created a study. We basically took six tasks. Ones that demanded creativity and problem solving and memory, and also some kind of physical skill like throwing a ball at a target and so on. So we had a set of tasks, and together they took about 45 minutes, and we had three groups. The first group, we said, look, if you do well on these 6 tasks, you will get money as a bonus equivalent to 1 day of your salary. If you do 3 out of the 6, you'll get half as much. If you get 2 out of the 6, you'll get third as much, and so on. So every task you get is at 1/6 of a day's wages. That was group 1. Group 2, we doubled the incentives 10 times. So instead of 1 day, it was 10 days of work, 2 weeks of work, right, with the weekends. So we said if you do well on these tasks, you will get 10 times more money than the other people. You get 2 weeks worth of wages. And the third group, we multiplied again 10 times, and we said if you do well on those tasks, you will get 6 months' salary. Now, before you wonder where's our research budget coming from, I should tell you we outsourced this. So we ran this experiment in India where we could pay people 6 months' salary of their own salary and not completely deplete our research budget. Actually, I don't think we could even pay 6 months' salary if we wanted to on our research budget. But anyway, that was the experiment. And what happened? People came to the task, they did as well as they could, they got the money and so on. Between the 1 day salary and the 2 week salary, we didn't see any change in performance. Performance didn't go up, it didn't go down, just stayed the same. Between the 2 week bonus and the 6 months bonus, it actually went down dramatically. In fact, in some tasks, performance went down from about 40% of the people who reached this threshold of performing well to about 5% of the people who are performing well. Now, why is it that more money is actually bad? And you can think about this as money being a two-edged sword. We want to do well, but at the same time, it's very hard for us. And there was an old experiment like this with two rats running in a cage. And the rats basically had a maze, and some parts of the maze were safe and some were dangerous, and the rats have to learn which one is safe and which one is dangerous. And the dangerous part had electrical shocks in them, and across trial, the intensity of the electrical shock varied. So when it was not very high, the rats didn't have any motivation to learn, so learning was slow. As the intensity of the shock increased, performance was better and better and better. There was a reason to learn. But at some point, it not only got to a diminishing return, where learning became slower and slower, it actually became negative. Learning became slower and slower and slower. Less and less learning. And you can think about it that if you're in a situation that there's a lot of electrical shocks out there and they're powerful, it can overwhelm you. You can be so afraid, so captured by this, that you would not be able to do anything else. And in fact, when I got this result, I went to one of the big banks and I talked to them about their bonuses, and they said, no, we are not these kind of people. These are kind of regular people. We are different. We strive on stress. We work well on stress. We have no problem with this. And I said, I don't know. Maybe you are, but why don't we test it? And they were not interested. But I did ask them to tell me what they talk about in the office in the 2-3 months before bonuses come out, and they basically said they don't talk about anything outside of the bonuses. So even if they don't get really stressed, their mind share, what they're occupied with, what they think about, is just about the bonuses. Now there's one more interesting part to it. When we started the experiment in India, we wanted to create the most stress with the least amount of money. So we wanted to use loss aversion, the idea that it's more painful for us when we lose money than the happiness we get when we gain money. So we gave people the money up front. Imagine you were in the experiment. I would give you 6 months' salary. I said, this is your money, but if you don't do the task well, you'll have to give it back to us. The first subject we ran on this completely panicked. They couldn't do anything. They couldn't remember anything. They couldn't focus. They couldn't throw, nothing. The next subject was the same, shaking, not thinking, not able to do anything. But the second subject, once they finished the experiment and we told them to give us back all the money, they just ran away. And we didn't have the heart to chase him. So we changed the procedure. But if you think about it, a lot of people in Wall Street are actually in the second condition. A lot of people on Wall Street are not. The bonuses don't come to them as a surprise. They already count on it. They bank on it. They buy houses and send their kids to school. Taking this into account, making it very, very hard not to even stress more over bonuses. Now, what's the point of all of this? And let's stop with bonuses and move to more general topics. We have a lot of intuitions and ideas about how life works. For example, we think that bigger bonuses will create better performance.
James, you heard me?
And it's perfectly possible that in many conditions this will happen, but this
Twitter
data
question.
should get you to think that this might
Can
not
these
be the
results
case
be applied to the U.S.
in
if the
all
study was
cases.
done abroad?
Okay, so somebody on Twitter asked a really good question. He said, can these results apply to the US even if they were done abroad? This is kind of a very interesting question about generally what happens with cultural differences. And in general, I should tell you that we don't find many cultural differences across country, at least only the stuff that we do, which is usually kind of basic human behavior. But we also decided to run this experiment in the US to see how it works here. So we ran this experiment twice. We ran it once at MIT, and at MIT we ran it with 2 tasks. One task that requires simple mathematical addition tasks, so people had to add some numbers, and one task that just had an effort task, just putting your finger on 2 keys on the keyboard and typing as fast as you can. And both of them were for 5 minutes, and what we saw that was for the typing task, performance went up with more money, but for the adding task, it went down. So what happened is that when it's just physical effort, there's no problem. More money yields better performance. If I ask you right now to jump and I said I'll pay you $10,000 for each jump, you manage to jump in the next 10 minutes, you'll jump very quickly and very, very hard. But the moment these tasks require some cognitive skills, some ability to think, and so on, it becomes much harder. Because you can't just race in the same way that you race your jumping and say, I'm not going to be tired, I'm not going to stop. Thinking is not like that. It's very hard to close your eyes and say, okay, now I really want to be creative. Let me try and be as creative as possible.
Very good. We have a question here about the type of payment, and this is an email that comes in from Tigran, and he wants to know if you paid by, say, vacation days or about free classes, would that affect what goes on?
Yes. So this is, again, the right question to ask. What we're showing is that bonuses have a plus and have a minus. They have a plus that they get us to want to work hard, but they have a minus that they get us to be stressed. And now you can ask different questions about how you get the good thing about bonuses without the bad thing. And you can come up with all kinds of solutions. You could say, what if it was linked to your performance over the last 5 years, not just over the last year? What if it was shorter bonuses? We don't have to wait a year. You learn every month what part of it you're getting for sure. So there's lots of ways to do it and create less stress. The question about what if it's vacation day, what if it's classes, depends on whether this will create more stress or less stress. So for example, I can imagine that if we give people vacation days and they're already banking on it, they're counting on it, they have a family vacation set up to go to wherever they want, and all of a sudden they might not be able to get these vacation days, it might be even more stressful. But the issue is motivation and stress. And how do we get the motivation up but don't get the stress up? And that's kind of going to be the key.
Very good. Viewers can join this Duke Office Hours conversation in 3 ways: by emailing live@duke.edu, visiting the Duke University Facebook page, or using the Twitter tag Duke Live. We've got a question here from Luke. He's emailed in. He is an incoming freshman here at Duke, and he wants to look at the other current conversation about healthcare reform. And his question is, if Obamacare gets passed, how will it affect the medical job market?
Okay, so there's a lot of important things in the new decisions about how to do healthcare, and let me just tell you kind of a couple of what I think, from my perspective, of the real big problems. So I recently went to visit Mount Sinai Hospital in Chicago, and they're dealing with a lot of asthma, and we talked about asthma for this meeting. And here's what happened. The inner city of Chicago, about 1 in 4 kids have asthma. They live in bad conditions, dust, cockroaches, vermins, and so on. The kids are very susceptible to asthma, and they get lots of asthma. Now they get these inhalers and they get the medications. The medications are expensive and they don't always take them. They end up getting to the emergency room. And they get up to the emergency room, they cost a tremendous amount of money, not to themselves because they don't have insurance, but to society. So what happened is we have these two entities, one that worries about the medications, about the inhalers and so on, and one that worries about emergency room treatment. And for something like $200 improvement in their adherence for the medication, we could save something like $20,000 in terms of their emergency room bills. But because these are different systems, we never do that. So one of the hope is that under the new plan, preventative care will be a bigger deal, because there's so many things that by preventative care we can actually save lots of money down the line. Diabetes, asthma is kind of a great example, because if people take their asthma medications regularly, there's almost no reason for anybody ever to get to hospital back for an emergency procedure, and the medications are not that expensive, so it's a tremendous benefit. So going back to this question, I think that one of the things will happen to physicians is they will move away from acute fixing things to preventative care. Now, it's kind of interesting about how much physician could charge for it. And, you have a heart pain, you go to a heart surgeon and they say it's $400,000. What are you going to say? Forget it, or I'll go somewhere else. It's very hard, and we pay lots of money for these procedures. We seem to be willing to pay much less for preventative care. So I think more physicians will have to move there, and I think the salaries would have to be reduced accordingly, just because people are not as willing to pay for it. But it will become a bigger part of medicine. The other thing that will happen is that we will have to start doing some rationing. I mean, it will be very, very tough to do, because morally we don't like to ration health, but we will have to do it. Somebody came to my office 2 weeks ago to tell me about a new heart pump. Great technology, many people eventually die from congestive heart failure, right? At some point, it kills a lot of people. We get old and so on, and heart goes away, and congestive heart failure is a common thing. This particular new device can extend the life with 50%, extending the life for another year. That's not bad. The question is, how much does it cost? Per year of living, it costs about $500,000. Now, if you live less, it's actually more expensive. If you live more, it's a little cheaper because you average it. But per year of living, this device costs $500,000. The device, the procedures, and so on. Now the question is, are we going to continue supporting this? Are we going to pay for this? We have an unbelievable appetite for health. I mean, it's hard to say when are we going to stop. I have a little bit of pain in my knee. For $50,000, I could get a partial knee surgery that would make me be able to play better basketball on the weekend. Is this good for the taxpayer to pay for it? You remember Steve Austin, the $6 million man. Right now, $6 million looks like a cheap version of what we can invest in our health. So another issue is we'll have to figure out what kind of things are worth it and what kind of things are not. And this is going to be an incredibly hard task. And I think much of what we're going to do in medicine is going to become evidence-based medicine, when we will try to figure out how much value are we really getting from different kind of treatments. So I think physicians will move early in the food chain of medical treatment and do much more preventative care. And I think there'll be much more requirement to do evidence-based medicine, because that will be what we're willing to pay for, and kind of reduce a lot of stuff that we're not going to be willing to pay for.
Very good. Viewers can join this Duke Office Hours conversation in 3 ways: by emailing live@duke.edu, visiting the Duke University Facebook page, or using the Twitter tag Duke Live. We've got a question emailed in from Brenda. It's again about current events, and this is about the stock market. She writes, Dan, I still don't feel comfortable putting money back in the market just yet. What is it going to take to get that comfort level back? Brenda.
Yes, so Brenda, I feel exactly the same, and I think this news from today about the bonuses and so on help to shake our confidence to even new lows, if this was even possible. Basically, kind of 2 ways to regain confidence, and I think good intuitions can come up from thinking about personal relationship. What would happen if your significant other betrayed you in some big way? What will help you regain confidence? First of all, it can't happen overnight, right? Many people say, I can never trust this person anymore. Let me start a new relationship with somebody else. And I think this could have been one direction. In fact, I wish that instead of putting so much money into the banks that have betrayed our trust, the government would have started some procedure to start new banks. Basically allow it for easier emergence of new banks with new rules and new regulations and so on. And I frankly think that people would have created banks that are more socially responsible or more responsible. There's a lot of people, I think, who are interested in it. If it was easier to create banks, we would have seen more action, not to mention more innovation in banking. So that's one thing, right? I wish we would have said, Bank X, very unlikely I'll trust you back in the next 7 years. I don't have the time to wait for you to regain my trust. Let's start a new procedure. The second thing, of course, is if you can't have real trust, you can have monitoring. So again, think about kids or spouse. You say, look, I don't trust you, but I'll put a digital camera on you so I know every moment where you are and I can track you and so on. And that's kind of what we're trying to do with some of the regulations on banking, to basically control them better and be notified quicker what they're doing. But they're playing shenanigans as well, so this is not very helpful. So personally, I think this is a good time for small banks to re-emerge as ones that don't play shenanigans, the federal credit unions and so on, and for new banks to emerge, and that's what would really get the banking system back in line. Because if you had a few small new banks that started fresh with trust, the other banks will have to do something to respond to this competitive pressure, and I think they would change as well.
Very good. So let's take a step back here and talk about behavioral economics. This field, we're talking about trust. That is in a way, a psychological factor. So you're a professor of behavioral economics. What's this tension between behavioral economics and traditional economics?
Okay, so trust is a great way to think about it. So imagine the game we call the trust game. You have player A and you have player B, and you give player A $10. And you say, look, player A, you have $10. You can decide to go home, in which you go home with 10, player B goes home with 0. You don't know who player B is. You just play anonymously over the internet, let's say. Or you can say to player A, you can pass your $10 to player B. If you pass your $10 to player B, we will quadruple it. So by the time player B gets it, it will be $40. And now player B can decide whether to go home with $40, in which case you, player A, will get 0, or they can decide to give you back half of it, in which case you both will get $20. Now, think about it. If you're player A, and you say, what would player do? What would player B do? If you think player B is a perfectly rational person, you would say they will never return the money to me. So I will never give them the money to start with because I know what will happen. I will just lose the money. But what happens, so this is the economic rational prediction, is nobody will give the money, and if they do give, nobody will return. But what actually happens is that many people give and many people reciprocate. Now, this is a place where people don't behave like rational theory. They deviate from it in systematic, predictable way. People give a lot of money in this game, and it's not exactly just bad. Much of behavioral economics is about the mistakes we do. Here it's not just about the mistakes, it's also about the nice thing that we do to each other, like the fact that we're too trusting and too reciprocating than the selfish model tells us. But there's another interesting version of this, which has to do with revenge. So again, imagine you're player A, you gave the money to player B, and player B decided to go home with all the money. And now I come to you and I said, look, I'm sorry you just lost your $10, but I know where to find player B. You don't know who he is, but I know where to find him. If you give me money, I'll find player B and I'll take double the amount of money from him. So if you give me $1, I'll find him and take $2 away from you. You'll give me 5, I'll take 10. You give me 10, I'll take 20. And so on and so forth. And now think about it. Would you just lost your $10, would you spend even more of your own money to get player B to suffer even more? And right now you don't feel revenge, you don't feel angry, but the reality is when you do, there's a good chance you would. People really are willing to spend lots of money to exert revenge against somebody. And again, everybody who got divorced or broke up with somebody feel this tension. And when somebody is betrayed, you're willing to go to lots of lengths to suffer a lot yourself to get the other party to pay the price. Now, here again, revenge is a non-rational sentiment. Why would you want to spend your money to punish somebody you don't know and you'll never meet them again? It's not as if they're a good friend of yours and you hope to play again with them in the future. But it turns out you can actually think about this mechanism of revenge as a very useful mechanism. So imagine you and I live in a jungle and you're thinking whether to steal something from me, like my mango. If you think I'm a rational person, you would say that as long as I take Dan's mango and run away far enough, it will be easier for me to go and find a new mango rather than chase you. And under those conditions, you might take my mango. But if you think I'm a revengeful type, and you know I will not sleep and I will not rest until I find you and take my mango and all your bananas and maybe a coconut, under those conditions, you will not start with me. So here again, we have something like revenge, which is an irrational sentiment, nevertheless could be incredibly effective in regulating a society and get people to behave well and actually having some benefit. Now, it's not all benefit and it's not rational, but you can see how something that is irrational could nevertheless be helpful.
So where might this show up in an economics textbook when the next versions of traditional economics textbooks come out? How are they going to take into account these insights from behavioral economics, the irrational behavior?
Yeah, so there's a question of textbook and there's a question of the practice of economics, which is the discipline that influences most policy and regulation and the legal system and so on, and banking, of course. So my guess is the textbook will include a couple of chapters at the end that will be about behavioral economics. So they'll say, here is the standard model, you've learned the standard models, here's all kinds of ways in which people deviate from the standard model. But I don't think we know how to integrate it into economics, right? You say, here is supply and demand, and in the same chapter saying, but it really doesn't work this way, right? It will be very, very hard to do. So I think there'll be kind of standard economics in the beginning of a textbook and qualifications at the end. The really important thing is not what happens to economics. People often ask me, why do you attack economics? Why not attack people in other fields? History, sociology. Why is everybody picking on economics? And the reason is that because economics became de facto the input for social policy and for business, right? Economics is a beautiful field. People should keep on doing it. Rational theory is beautiful. Game theory is wonderful. There's no reason why people shouldn't try and get insights from that. The problem is that when you take these insights and you implement them to the market, and you not just say, I know something interesting, you say, I know everything there is to know about how to do taxes, how to do healthcare, and so on. Only listen to me. And now you create a system that is just based on economics and could be wrong in very, very important ways. So I actually want not so much economics as a field to change. I want the field of taking lessons from economics and applying them to change. So for example, think about some education reform. When we come to think about how much we should pay teachers and whether teachers should be paid as a performance of their kids or not, and whether kids should be rewarded financially for getting good grades, these are all possibly good questions. There's result in psychology showing that the answer is probably no, but it's still, there's all kinds of possibilities. I would like us to sit with all the possibilities, get input from economics, get input from psychology, maybe from sociology, maybe from philosophy, and basically create some experiments and say the reality is we just don't know enough about this to spend lots of money creating one policy. Let's do some tests. Let's figure out what are the most likely candidates to be effective. Economics can suggest a few, psychology can suggest a few, and so on. And let's do basically a horse race and see which one of those approaches seem to be the most effective, and then run with it.
Very good. Viewers can join this Duke Office Hours conversation in 3 ways: by emailing live@duke.edu, visiting the Duke University Facebook page, or using the Twitter tag Duke Live. We've got a question here from John posted to your blog, Dan, and he wants to have some fun with this idea of market norms and social norms mixing. He's thinking of a Seinfeld episode when Jerry starts dating his cleaning lady, but then when they break up, the social pressure of the broken relationship trumps the professional relationship. She quits and he fires her. So John says, I'm sure there are more examples from Seinfeld. The Simpsons seems like it would work really well too. Professor Ariely, any thoughts on behavioral economics that you see played out on TV?
Yeah, so sadly I don't watch enough TV, although I will look for this Seinfeld episode. If you can tell me kind of if you remember which season it was, I'll find it. I think it's kind of interesting to think how in literature and television and popular culture and even in jokes, there's a lot of wisdom in those things and a lot of ways to get data and idea. In fact, on Tuesday, I'm having a brainstorming session with my students, and I asked them all to think about jokes and stories and things from general popular culture that kind of bring a particular view of human nature and kind of get us to question something. I have used also a few of those in class. So there's a Seinfeld episode in which they talk about must-lie situations, in which they see a particularly ugly baby and they feel that you have to lie, and we've used that as an insight about under what conditions, how do people decide how to weigh the cost and benefits of lies, and so on. There's, of course, with the social and market norm, there's this, the movie where, I forgot the name of the actor, where he tries to get Demi Moore to basically buy a night from her husband, and this kind of creates a huge conflict between the husband of the wife who is getting to get paid $1 million to spend the night with somebody else, and how it changes their relationship. And finally, there's of course the well-known joke when somebody comes to a woman and say, "Ma'am, would you have sex with me for money?" And she said, "Me? Of course not. What do you think? I'm a prostitute?" He says, "How about for $1 million?" He said, "Oh, for $1 million, I'll have sex with you." He said, "Okay, now that we've established you're a prostitute, let's negotiate the price." And I think it's kind of an interesting joke, but it's also interesting from an economic perspective. Think about what it tells us. It says, the woman is saying, I have a sacred value. There's something I'm not willing to sell, which is my body. And then you offer her enough money. She said, okay, I'm willing to sell it. Now the question is, what amount of money would you settle for? And what happens more generally when we take values that we think are sacred and we put a price on them? So we have discussions now about basically taking pollution and making it to a market. So right now, I spend time every morning, once a week in the morning, sorting the recycling, trying to save energy. I turn the lights off and so on. It's all in the social norm world. We do it for our kids and for other people and so on. And we drive Priuses and we do all kinds of things like that. What happens when you put a price on it? What happens when you say to somebody, you know what? Would you do this how about if instead of sorting your recycling, just pay me $25 a week and you don't have to spend this hour doing that, right? What would happen then? Will we stop recycling and not only stop there, but stop caring about the environment more generally? So I think this joke, for example, says what happens when you show people that they have no sacred values, that for a certain price you will be willing to do it. Can you basically chip away at their social value and caring? So thanks for your question. I think the idea of taking social and cultural discussions from television jokes and so on and getting them to get insights into human behavior is a fabulous idea, and I'll tell you how it works after next Tuesday.
We have another question coming from everyday life. This one comes from Sean, and it's about buying wedding gifts. And so he asks, this is a place where you have financial factors as well as social norms at work. So is the best gift cash, a gift card, something from the registry, or something off the registry?
Yeah. So I think this is a very good question, because what's best depends on what's your goal. And we have efficiency versus we have friendship. So in this whole notion between social norm and market norm, there's an idea that what can be financially effective is not necessarily what's socially effective. If you invite me to come to your house for dinner, the most financially effective thing for me to do is to give you cash. Say, thank you very much. I was going to buy a wine for $50. I don't know what wine you like. Maybe you prefer blender. Here's $50. Do the best you can with it. And it's economically much more efficient. At the same time, giving you cash is by no means going to increase our friendship in any way. It will not happen that tomorrow I can ask you for a favor and you will be more likely to do it. Maybe even less likely. Say, how much would you pay me now? So we have economic efficiency on one side, and that's where cash wins for weddings and everything else. And then we have this other side in which you invest in a gift that actually create friendship. But these are harder to do, and you can actually miss. And kind of gift cards are a little bit like cash, but a little less like cash, and registry are somewhere in the middle. I personally have never given cash or gift cards or bought anything from a registry, because the goal I try to optimize is friendship, right? I much prefer if people don't bring gifts at all, right, than giving me cash. Now, if it's it used to be that people very early got married and they didn't have anything, so cash could be useful. But these days, most people have a job. They don't really need your $100. So I think about gifts as something that is aiming at increasing our friendship, and because of that, I never give cash. Maybe now I'll get fewer invitations to things as well. The other thing, which is kind of interesting, is I sometimes think about gifts that I think people should have even though they don't know about it. So think about it like paternalistic giving, where you have somebody that you say, you don't like this music right now, but I really think you're the kind of person who should try it. So I try to think about gifts in a way that would expand somebody's horizon. What is it that I think would make them better? They might not realize it right now. They might think, I really want a beautiful bottle wine opener, but I think that they would be much happier if they tried something else. And finally, I think that experiences are very good gifts, right? So if you think about it, physical stuff is physical stuff, and you have a lot of it, and if you happen to hit the right thing, it's great. The reason we give flowers and wine is because we say we want to give you a gift, but we don't want to impose on you for a long time. So wine you can drink, flowers get away. If you buy something, a big ugly statue, there's nothing they can do with it, right? It's kind of just getting space. So from that perspective, buying people experiences, cooking lessons, vacations, all kinds of stuff like that is actually incredibly useful.
Viewers can join this Duke Office Hours conversation in 3 ways: emailing live@duke.edu, visiting the Duke University Facebook page, or using the Twitter tag Duke Live. We have a Twitter question here, Professor Ariely. It's from N. Lynn Sheed, who asks a practical question: how can small business managers best use your ideas?
Okay, so we have lots of ideas. There's one way for people to be rational, and there are many ways to be irrational. There's all kinds of mistakes people do. And when you think about kind of behavioral economics, there's a question of how do you use these principles. One way is to get people to make a mistake that you want them to make. Another one is to make them to not make a kind of mistake that you don't want them to make. So we find, for example, that when people stand too many options, they often say, I just don't know what to do, maybe another day, and they just procrastinate, right? So you can think about how to reduce procrastination, which is good for people. You can think about how to get people to make a particular mistake that you want them to make. That's another use. I don't particularly like it. But I think the real opportunities for small businesses is to think about where there are free lunches, where there are things that are not implemented right now, but that with some understanding of human nature, you can actually improve. So I'll give you an example. We're working now with a company called Glow Caps, and what they have is a little pill box for medication that is internet enabled. So the little top of the box has a little chip that communicates with the internet, and we now get to learn when people are taking their medications or not. And in general, medication compliance is very low in the US. And now the question is, so what do we do with it? And now we have this Glow Cap. We can tell people, oh, you know what? We're going to pay you when you take your medication. Or we're going to penalize you for it. Or we're going to tell your mother if you don't take medication. There's all kinds of solutions, and we're testing a lot of them to figure out how do you take this human problem of not taking medications on time, some memory, some side effects, all kind of other things, and how do you inject technology in that get people to do more of what they should be doing? So from a business perspective, I think these are kind of the opportunities. Figure out what people don't do well that they wish they would do well, and think about how you help people do it, and in the process, make money.
In speaking about medicine and taking medicine, you describe in your book and elsewhere how significant events in your life have shaped particular experiments and even your career. Is that something that's ongoing, an intersection between personal life and professional endeavors? How does that work?
Yeah, so the wonderful thing about studying human nature is we all have human experiences, and often what happened to me is I experience something, I think about it, I say, did I make a mistake? Didn't I make a mistake? I see my wife making something, I say, did she make a mistake? And then I get to think about it, how do I want to understand this? And then we start from there doing experiments. So for example, this idea of the internet-enabled pill boxes came to me from my own personal experience. When I was in hospital many years ago, from blood transfusion, I got infectious disease. I got hepatitis C. And after a while, I started having to take a medication called interferon. Now, interferon is a very unpleasant medication. It has lots of side effects, vomiting, nausea, and so on. And I had to give myself a medication 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So I would have to come home and give myself an unpleasant injection. Now, think about it. How would you do it? You come in, you give yourself an injection, in an hour you're going to be sick. It's very hard to do. Now, I didn't want to die from liver cirrhosis 30 years later, but I clearly didn't want to spend 3 nights a week for a year and a half feeling sick. So every day I had this dilemma, do I inject or not? At the end of the year and a half, the doctors told me that I was the only patient who took the medication regularly. The question is, why? Why was I able to do it better than other people? And the reason was that I had a trick. And my trick was that I love movies. If I had time, I would watch more movies. And on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I would first thing in the morning, I would go to a video store. I would rent 2 or 3 movies. I would carry them in my backpack the whole day. When I came home, I would inject myself, put a video, and start watching a movie and then watching another one. I would put the blanket next to me for shivering, put a bucket next to me for vomiting, but I was ready to enjoy the movies as much as I could. So what I basically did was intuitively, I took something very unpleasant, these injections, and something I really craved, and I put it together. Now, in reality, I should have cared about not dying from liver cirrhosis in the future, but this is not a strong enough motivation. So I created a substitute for it, movies that happen in the present. And I think this is another general lesson. We figure out what things we're not able to do because we just can't care so much about the future, and how we create things that bring those to the present. So if you think about the pill boxes, it's about that. People should care about the medication, they don't. How do we create an incentive at the moment? And the easiest one to do is financial incentives, but we can also do social and other things like that. So I routinely go around life making mistakes or have particular behavior of me or other people, and then I look at it and try to analyze it, take it to the lab, try to understand it a bit better, and then think about how do we solve that.
Professor Ariely, we're at your office hours. There are questions lining up here. You can say what else you want to keep talking about. There's a question about baseball, derivatives. We've got one about negative consequences. Anything else here that's on your mind that you want to talk about?
Let's try the negative consequences.
Okay, this question comes from Mike, and he is asking, he sent by email, you've talked a lot about positive incentives, but what about negative? Does behavioral economics have any suggestions for the criminal justice system that deals oftentimes with people who are not normal but social deviants? Thoughts on that?
Okay, so first of all, I should say that we know very little about social deviance because it's very hard to study. In terms of the criminal system, we've done lots of research on cheating. I don't know if you know much of this research, but we've done lots of research on cheating. And what we find is that, sure, there's a few people who cheat a lot, but there's a lot of normal people who cheat just a little bit. And the reality is they end up costing us much more. So if you're looking at the stock market and you say how much damage did Madoff cost, right? One individual who cheated a lot compared to how much damage was caused by lots of people who cheated just a little bit here and there and still felt about themselves as normal, law-abiding, good people, the reality is that much more was lost to the good people who are cheating just by a little bit. So the exceptions are not that powerful economically. Now, it's very sad. Somebody broke into my car a while ago. It was stressful, and I had to clean the window and get a new window. It was annoying, but the reality was that they took much less money from me than what my stockbroker probably does every day, right? Or not every day, every month, right? So there's an issue about the economic value, and then there's the issue of what we emphasize. So I think white-collar crime by normal people is much more common and much more devastating financially than the blue-collar crime we see. The other part of your question is, we talk about how to get people to behave better. What do we do with positive and negative? So what we know from animal literature, from animal training, is that negative rewards and punishments are very, very effective, but only if you direct people to what to do. So if you walk around the street and I just hit you from time to time when you're doing something I don't like, you're just going to get confused and paralyzed and stressed. If I hit you when you do something bad, but I also point you to what I want you to do, that's the right solution. And finally, I'll say something about the prison system. Our prison system is not, there's no evidence that we're actually reforming anybody. It's incredibly costly for society. Per day in state prisons, we pay about $120 per person. Federal prisons, it's about double than that. It's really an incredibly expensive way to keep people out of society. And that's what we're doing. We're not using this money to rehabilitate people, to get them back into society. We just are using it to get people out. And I think it's one of those systems that we really have to think about how we're going to fix. And finally, our research, we show that if you think about the three levers that we have, which is the probability of being caught, how much police is out there, how much money people get to gain, like where they decide to steal from, and the size of the punishment that people can get, 1 year in prison, 3, 5 years. These economic variables don't seem to determine much of the economic activity of crime. Not nothing, but they don't seem to determine much of it. And instead, what has to do with the evolving social norms of what people are thinking is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And it's true that some groups develop incredibly strange norms about what's appropriate, right? For them, it's appropriate to go into somebody's house and take their television. And I think that's where we need to think about how we do interventions. How do we create a society in which even the subgroups in society don't have a feeling that some behaviors are kind of acceptable?
Professor Ariely, thank you for holding these office hours. Any concluding thoughts, topics for wrapping up?
The final thing I will just say, social science is really fun, right? The idea that you can make an experiment about everything. You drink coffee, or you garden, you buy something. Everything is an opportunity for experiment. And one of the wonderful things is that we don't know really much about our lives. We think that the mysteries about science is about the stars or molecular biology, and it's true, but it's also about everyday life. And what's wonderful about the kind of stuff we do is that we can all do experiments very easily about almost everything, and that's what I would invite you to participate in. And thank you very much.
Continue the conversation online. Email live@duke.edu, visit the Duke University Facebook page, or use the Twitter tag Duke Live. To learn more about Duke, visit duke.edu.